bad. You just didn't like what was on the menu. That's the issue. You might not have liked what was on the menu, because when the gospel is preached, it ain't about you. It's about, y'all were shouting a minute ago, what happened? It's about him. You can't hoop them and shout them every week. Some Sundays, folk ought to walk out of church mad. Some Sundays, folk ought to walk out of church thinking their shoes too small because their toes hurting from you stepping on. Some Sundays, and I would declare that when we understand the purpose of preaching, we recognize that it is the preaching of the gospel that is the answer to every problem. I would declare there's power in the preaching of the gospel because his presence is there. Power in the preaching of the gospel because essentially after his presence, we understand the purpose of our preaching. Paul says, now, I could have impressed you with great words. But he says, what I want you to understand is that something about this preaching, something about this gospel won't let me impress you with who I am, because it's all about him. Something about preaching this gospel, because I want you to understand that in the purpose of it, it focuses attention on God. Now, some folk won't appreciate that, but that's okay, because God still gets the glory. You see, some folk are looking for a sign. Some folk, if you don't turn backflips in the pulpit, they sit there and act like you ain't done nothing. Some folk want wisdom. If you ain't got 50 degrees behind your name, they won't even hear what you have to say. He said, don't worry about that. You just keep on preaching the gospel. Because as long as you preach, you're focusing on him. When you preach the gospel, it ought to lead folk to him. When you preach the gospel, it ought to guide folk to him. What good would it be for my preaching to be so good that everybody come to my church, but don't nobody know him? I wish I had me a witness here. What glory would there be if our preaching gathered folk to us, but never did lead them to him? The truth is, I love you, but I can't save you. And so I made up my mind a long time ago that, Lord, I'll preach your gospel as long as you keep on doing what you do. Because if folk come to me, I'm just going to have to be honest. I'm a sinner just like you. The only difference is that I got a gift in me to try to help somebody know who is really able to save them. I would declare that it is the purpose of God to lead them to him. But there's one more thing, and we out of here. We might even make halftime of the Falcons game. I declare there's one more thing we got to know. That those of us who would preach the gospel, those of us who would hear preaching, we got to know not only is the presence of God in preaching, not only must the power or the presence of God, the person of God be in our preaching, not only here now must the purpose of God be in preaching, but last thing I saw right there in the text is that the promise of God is in the preaching of the gospel. We through here now, the promise of God is in preaching. The fact that there are some who may not appreciate your gospel preaching, but as long as there's a promise in that message, have to go looking for nothing to preach. Don't have to go looking for sermons. Because as long as there's a promise in the gospel, the sermon will come find you. Don't have to look for what I'm going